Hey everybody, Jason Haas here for the Tablas Creek semi-weekly Instagram Live broadcast. Welcome. Um, my guest this week is Randy Caparoso, who is a writer, a photographer, an author, former founding partner of Roy's, the great kind of groundbreaking Hawaiian-based restaurant group. He's got 40 plus years as a writer. He's currently an editor-at-large for Somm Journal, as well as having published a recent book. There's all kinds of cool stuff that he's working on. I can't wait to talk to him. But before I do, I want to do two things. One, I just want to acknowledge the passing this week of Paul Dolan, the pioneering winemaker, founder, one of the first to embrace organics and biodynamics in the world of California wine. Founder, winemaker at Fetzer. Just a great guy. He was a guest on this Instagram Live conversation less than a year ago, and we are incredibly sad to hear his passing. So I just wanted to just give a little mention to Paul. He's one of my icons. And then I will, before I invite Randy on to join, I will also share a few pictures of what we have going on in the vineyard and in the cellar. In the vineyard, it is just gorgeous out there. We've had this sort of slight warming trend. It's now about to average temperatures for the season, which means it's going to get up into the mid-80s today. But it has not been particularly warm, but we will get our first real warm-up this weekend. But even that's not supposed to get even really up to 100. But what it means is that these vines that have been getting all of this lovely water from our wet winter are just exploding. This is a Viognier cane that's about 6 feet long. Normally, our Viognier canes top out at maybe 4 feet. If we're lucky, this was up significantly over my head. And that's just a sense of what things look like out there. Super lush. We're trying to go through and make sure that we keep the vigor to a reasonable level. So we're doing still our last pass of shoot thinning and some fruit thinning on some of the more vigorous blocks. We are through flowering mostly. I say mostly because you can still find grapes like this Mourvedre where you can see a few little berries on the bottom, but also some still a few flower clusters up on top. But most of the vineyard looks more like what you would expect to see in June. So say this is what Grenache looks like right now. So things look good. We are late. We're probably 3 or 4 weeks behind normal, looking on a path something like what we saw in 2010 and 2011. But the upshot is that we've had a bunch of early vintages. It's not a bad thing to have a later vintage. The pollinating blocks are amazing. This is a couple pictures of bumblebees on in one of the wild sage plants that we plant in the center of the vineyard. And I think that's pretty much what one more shot of just one of those Mourvedre vines. Again, you can see normally Mourvedre even a couple of weeks ago was looking looking the early season, and now it's looking great. Okay, in the cellar, just a super quick update because we're not doing a ton right now. We're basically pulling barrels of reds down, making sure we have all of those blends that we made the decisions on a couple of months ago in their actual blended form before we get too deep into the summer. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to ask Randy to join me. I don't actually see him there in the list of people watching. If Randy, if you are watching this, shoot me a request on your end. But I don't actually see it right now. Okay, I'll try one more. Nope, not there. Okay. Oh, there he is. Okay. I'm gonna. And hopefully he will see this, and we will have that split conversation.
Hello.
There we go. Hey, Randy.
Hey, Jason.
How you doing?
Fine. I might have been on the wrong page.
You're all good.
Okay.
You are on the right page now.
Okay, great.
So I gave a quick intro when we first started to the many different pieces of the wine world that you've had a really influential and an important path through, from working as a som, being one of the founding partners of Roy's, writing a wine column for 40 years, something like that. Now editor at large at Som Journal, recently published book. So there's lots to dive into, but I'd like to start with writers by asking sort of which came first, the interest in writing or the interest in wine?
Wine. I got into wine when I was just 18 years old. I was working in a restaurant in Honolulu, and you always start as a busboy. All you do is clear tables and stuff. But there was a notice on the bulletin board that there would be a wine tasting. So I asked the manager, "Hey, can I attend?" And he said, "Yeah, go ahead." And I attended. It happened to be a one for Inglenook Vineyards, and I believe 9 wines that day. And you could drink when you're 18 in those days. And I just was flabbergasted at tasting every wine, a Chenin Blanc, a Chardonnay, a Cabernet, blah blah blah. And so that was back in 1976. So quite a while ago. And I take that back. It was 1975, and I got so much into wine, I eventually became a sommelier, and that was my first job. Was 1978 in a French restaurant, tuxedos every night is prom night, and I started writing about wine in 1981. So it all came pretty fast. So the years have gone by, haven't they?
So, did you have a wine that for you, you remember, opening your eyes as sort of an aha, I get what people are talking about?
Many.
Or did it happen bit by bit?
Yeah, it was many wines. I think the first wine that truly not blew me over was Beaulieu Private Reserve, probably a 68. And I remember buying it for $12 in the local store, and this is in Hawaii, so I assume it was probably just $9 in California. But from you move on from there. In those days, I hate to sound like an old fart, but you could buy Chateau Lafite for $25. You could buy La Romani Contes for 35 if you really wanted to blow the budget, and a Decam for 35. And so life was different. So a young sommelier could taste all these wines. When I worked as a sommelier, I served Petrus and Lafite and Margaux, and we didn't charge more than 75 or $80. So it was different days. German wines were a big deal. Yeah. And so you could taste the greatest German wines, Berliner Sonneners, Schwarzhofburgers, and those are great vintages, 75, 76, and which we're still drinking till today, and earlier, 69 Mosels and Rheingaus, and so it's a great opportunity to learn. And so,
was there a big wine scene in Honolulu at that point? Were you part of a group of somms that all coming up together?
Actually, I was behind. We weren't coming together. So a lot of people do not realize this, but the first two American Master Sommeliers lived and worked in Hawaii. Ed Osterlin and Richard Dean, who has recently passed away. And they became Master Somms way back in the early 70s. And so this is before I even entered the scene as a sommelier. And so they were my seniors, even though they were in their 20s. Ron Wiegand lived there. He had a partnership in the school with Ed Osterland. He became an MS and an MW, and so really, four of the first seven American Master Sommeliers were living and working in Hawaii. So it was a great scene because everyone from around the world comes to Hawaii. So the restaurant, we had jobs for sommeliers. So the restaurant, it was good for the restaurant industry, and if you wanted to be a sommelier. And so, in all the brands, of course, were there, because, it's great for someone like you to have an account in accounts in Hawaii, because it's a great excuse to go to Hawaii. So,
That was always my conclusion. Always was like the Hawaii was so oversupplied with winery owners because everybody wanted to write off their Hawaiian vacation trips.
You were in your time. So yeah, that's exactly what it is. And but the 70s were a different time, of course, and so were the 80s. Chardonnay didn't become popular, if you recall, until around 1985.
Yeah, maybe. My dad helped launch Sonoma Cutrer, which was that sort of
right around that time.
That was that
right
wave.
Around that time, and then really it was a matter of Chardonnay getting into the ground. Because up until then, there wasn't a lot of Chardonnay in the ground. But once it started, after, that the Paris tastings in 76, and people start looking into it, and growing it. And also, because UC Davis and the nurseries, made clones 4 or 5, which were a little more reliable than the old Wente clones, in terms of cluster size, morphology, and consistency. And so that all came. Those UC Davis clones took over in the late 70s and the 80s. And then you could see Glen Ellen and Kendall Jackson Chardonnays for under $6. And that changed it for consumers, because all of a sudden, they had Chardonnay at their fingertips. They could go through the grocery line and there's Chardonnay bottles sitting at the cash register, which didn't really exist up until the mid 80s. So this, and White Zinfandel also became popular in around 84, 85. And so that kind of changed it, because that was another bridge. Before that, everyone drank Blue Nun and Lancers and Matus and stuff like that. In fact, those were my best-selling wines. I'm wearing a tuxedo, I have white gloves and the Tastavan, and I'm serving Blue Nun, or little bottles of Lancers and things like that. I mean, you could buy Petrus if you want it, or Beaulieu Private Reserve. I served that, but most people drank, Blue Nun and Blanc Blanc, Chenin Blanc, things like that. So fun times, so I always think that, sommeliers today are really, really spoiled. They have no idea what we had to go through.
But then again, you actually got to taste the classic wines of the world on a regular basis. I mean, there are pluses. The wine world is so much more established and more diverse, but it's also so much harder and more competitive to find the things that are like the absolute creme de la creme.
Yeah. So strange times. I remember interviewing Andrei Talashev back in the early 80s, because I started writing a newspaper column in 1981. And one of the questions I asked him is, so Andre, I know you say you've made 2 good Pinot Noirs in your 45 years as a winemaker. Do you think Pinot Noir in California will ever come to be? He said, yeah, it may be another 40, 50 years. So even Andre was wrong on that one, though. Yeah, remember, Andre had just got through planting what he thought would be a really good Pinot Noir vineyard in Paso Robles. True, it was a calcareous vineyard that is your neighbor today, farmed by Adelaida, and it's still a great vineyard, but it's not considered a great among today's Pinot Noirs, because it's very delicate and great.
Right. It's also great. I mean, the climate is not the same as it was when it was planted either. I mean, everything is now warmer than it was. So
yeah, but the calcareous soil was there, of course. So it's always had good acidity. And I served the HMR, or the Hoffman Mountain Ranch Pinot Noir, back in the mid '80s, early '80s, and I think they sold by the mid '80s. But there weren't a lot of good Pinot Noirs in the '80s, and so that didn't really come up into the mid '90s. But sooner than Teleshchef anticipated.
Yeah.
A lot of it is because people didn't anticipate that you could grow grapes in, say, colder regions like the Sonoma Coast, or in the lower parts of Sonoma. In fact, we were told it was held as gospel that it was impossible to grow vineyards in those regions. It's just too cold. You would never ripen. But vineyard technology had changed very, very quickly in the '80s, and VSP systems and clonal material, just that whole combination of things made it possible for really good Pinot Noirs to go into cold climate regions. And whereas in the '60s and '70s it was thought to be impossible. So these are very different times.
And I mean, it all highlights just how young the American wine world is by and large. That there are so many things that Europe has had millennia to figure out that, like, we've had 50 years. Like, it's really very young in most places.
When you consider it, Americans had it kind of figured out within 10, 15 years. And you're still perfecting it, of course, to this day. But it's pretty fast.
Yeah.
So in the old days, of course, when they had Paris tasting, and people were saying, "Oh, California makes great Chardonnay like they do in France," but they'll tell you the truth. In the '70s and '80s, those Chardonnays are way over oaked because the Californians at that time had discovered oak. That's the secret ingredient, and so those wines are horribly oaky. And I remember them quite distinctly because we did blind tastings too. We did our own Paris tastings. I never understood how the French could possibly have mixed up a California Cab and Chard with a French Burgundy port. Yeah, because they're so different, But truth be told, French Burgundies were over oak too in those days. So that wasn't so much a factor. So they were both shitty, in other words.
Wait, hold on. Okay, I want to make sure. I have a couple things I want to make sure that I ask you about. I know we're going to get back into some of this historical stuff when we talk about Lodi.
Yeah.
But before I do that, I wanted to talk to you.
Enough of the old. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about your time at Roy's, because that's such a formative restaurant, I think, in sort of the fusion of Asian flavors into American flavors, the development of these sort of higher end restaurant groups. Because that was still it was a newish thing, and you were overseeing the whole wine program there. You were one of the founding partners. What was that world like?
All of it true. So it started in the late '80s, and so again set it up. Where I was a sommelier for 10 years working in French restaurants or in steakhouses, and one of the things that always puzzled me is, we serve Burgundies and Bordeaux and Cabernets and Chardonnays, Chenin Blancs, and I never thought the wines really went with the food that we actually ate, which was always Asian influence, because you're in Hawaii, and so we ate Asian all the time. And then, so along comes this chef who became a California Chef of the Year back in the early '80s. His name is Roy Yamaguchi, and then he decides to leave LA, where he had a restaurant, and open up a restaurant in 1988 in Hawaii, and name it after himself, Roy's, which sounds like it was like a cowboy steakhouse. But and so let me tell you, I had a hard time getting people to work for me too. I said, why would I work in a restaurant called Roy's? And so anyhow, and I would tell people, no, it's going to be really good because this guy does fusion. He's French trained, so everything has a sauce. So it had lots of Asian ingredients in there. So it was a big challenge, but it was exciting for me because finally, here it is, Jason. Before it used to be, oh, what kind of classic wines go with Asian food? Well, not a lot. So you had to have different kinds of wines. But here's the chef. but was using Asian ingredients with French sauces. You know, stock reductions, or beurre blanc butter sauces with Asian spices, and Asian ingredients on the dish, and Hawaiian fish and all that kind of stuff. And so now you have bridges, and so it was easier to make that transition and to create wine programs for that kind of food, because they were French. It was French based cooking, right? Even though it was fusion. But the thing is, we knew from the very beginning that classic wines still weren't the best bet. Yeah, I remember when we first opened, I had Polini and Chassagne Montrachets and full-bodied classic California Chardonnays and Napa Valley Cabernets on the wine list, but people would order them and drink it and have it with their food, but they wouldn't, quite often they wouldn't finish the bottle. Right. And so when you're observing that, you're thinking, okay, maybe this isn't right. And so I immediately started going out around the world to try to find the wines that did. So you start to realize that you need wines with higher acid, lower alcohol, less oak, more minerality, crisper qualities. And so you either find Chardonnays and Cabernets that are like that, or you go out and find other wines that fit that. And so, so our wine list immediately changed. So it got to a point where I might have 2 Cabernets, but 20 Pinot Noirs on the list. You know what I mean? You serve a lot of Pinot Gris and very little of the oaky Chardonnay. In fact, we went one step further and we started having great winemakers craft wines in the style that we needed, because you can't stop people from ordering Chardonnay in the late 80s and 90s, because all people drank. 90% of the sales were White Zinfandel or Chardonnay, because the American public was still in the baby stage. And so if they're going to drink Chard, then you have to have a Chardonnay they can drink. So I had Jim Clendenin at Au Bon Climat pick, grapes a little earlier, make them crisper, hold back on the oak, and get more minerality. And voila, you have Chardonnay that goes with that kind of Asian fusion food. And we were producing 500 cases of that just for our restaurant every year.
Was that the first sort of private label, not private label, but like special cuvee that he did? Because that became a huge piece. Like, you would go to so many great restaurants and you would see the special Au Bon Climat made for that restaurant. I was wondering, did you start that?
Oh, no, I'm not that much of a genius. There was a little steakhouse that had Ridge making a Cabernet for them in Waikiki. And I looked at it and said, man, that's a good idea. But I'm not going to have Ridge make my Cabernet because they're a steakhouse. That's perfect for them. But I said, why don't I go one step further? And so I had like Clendenin, and then I discovered Lynn Penner-Ash in Oregon, and she started producing a Pinot Noir and Pinot with me. I went to Germany, had Weinhaus Hager make a white wine in the Baden, and Von Bosselmann Jordan produced our own Riesling from a cabinet from a specially selected vineyard, and then same thing for sparkling wine. We made our own cuvées, and then we even started producing our own Cabernets, lighter style, a little more textured. And so Patrick Campbell at Laurel Glen helped me with that. In Santa Barbara, we did Cabernet Franc and Sangiovese. But again, it was probably the first full-fledged program in a restaurant, where you have 11, 12 wines that are customized for your cuisine. To this day, that's rarely done. But we could do it because we grew very quickly. We're very popular. And so we had multiple restaurants. And
you opened like 28 restaurants or something?
At that point, we had over 30, but I opened up 28 of them myself.
And so, wait, as you're doing, you're running this national wine program for this like rapidly growing restaurant group. You're opening restaurants, and you're still finding time to write about wine. How did you decide that was something that you wanted to do in amongst all of the other things that you were having to do?
Well, I've always written about wine, even before I became a sommelier. I wrote wine notes, right? That's what you do, right? You collect corks. You get really geeky and you steam labels off of bottles and you put it in a book. I did all that stuff, and I wrote notes and we'd have big tastings. I have it with friends, or professionals, and I would write notes about all our tastings. And so what happened was, my younger sister one day had a boyfriend, and he worked for the local newspaper, and one day, and he attended a couple of tastings, and so he showed the editor the stuff I had written, and the editor called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to write wine columns?" So there you go. That started in 1981, and so I do that every 2 weeks. And you know what, Jason, I did that for fun. I didn't do that. I mean, they paid me $50. Woohoo! But no, I actually did that, because I enjoy writing about wine. And so that actually, I'm now a full-time journalist. But I used to do it for fun. And I didn't become a full-time journalist until 2008, when the stock market crashed and no one was hiring me as a restaurant consultant. And so I decided, I better do something. But you know what? I've been doing all this writing all these years, so why don't I write? And so I actually do that for a living. I can't believe I do either. I'm starving. But
so in like your main, is your main like professional writing done through Somm Journal? Is that what sort of puts the bread and wine on the table?
No, actually, it's my big job in doing writing for the Lodi Wine Grape Commission.
Okay.
And because you probably know, it consists of about 750 growers, and they tax themselves, so they have multi-million-dollar budget. So,
right, and they need somebody good to tell their story. Absolutely.
In the early 2000s, I was the only person that I know of working in the restaurant industry that was even interested in Lodi vineyards and wines, and so they kept inviting me back. And for years, I've come to Lodi at least once or twice a year. I love the place. It always reminded me of Southwest France. Old vineyards, warm climate. Great soils. In terms of Southwest France, and also in terms of the fact that it's an underrated region,
right?
And first time I came to Lodi, I thought, wow, these vineyards, these terroirs are amazing. And, so why aren't they great? So I wanted to be part of that. And so, I was part of the opening editing team of this when the Somm Journal was a sommelier journal, and that was back in 2008. I happened to be living in Front Range of Colorado, and that's where the magazine was founded. And then it was just subscription, so it never made any money. In fact, it probably just lost a lot of money. So 2005, it went out of business. I convinced Meredith May of the tasting panel to purchase it. And so she took it over, and overnight it went up to 100,000 subscribers, because it's a different formula. It's an advertising base now, as the Somm. Before, it was just a subscription. And the big issue with that is, you can get sommeliers to subscribe to the magazine, but they will never renew it. Yeah, they're all cheap son of a bitches, and so or forgetful or something. The sommelier journal did not work, but you can do an advertising driven magazine, and that's what May does, and she does it very well.
Yeah, for sure. So one more question about Somm Journal before we jump into your book and a little more into Lodi. Okay. But I'm curious, like, having worked as a somm on the floor, run wine programs, write for a publication that was originally marketed to somms, that now has somm in its name. What are your thoughts about anyone who has a little bit of wine training putting sommelier in their title, whether or not they're actually working on the floor of a restaurant, connecting people with wines?
That's true. A real sommelier actually works in a restaurant and thousands of wine glasses, and they serve tables and they work in cold wine cellars. That's a real sommelier, and there still aren't a lot of them, but there are a lot more than before. Now, when I started, of course, there were only about a dozen of them, so we all knew each other across the country. But today, of course, many people see the good thing about the sommelier whole thing, or the classes that they offer and all that kind of stuff. It's a great way to learn about wine. So, and then in another factions there are W sets, which started off as a way for people to study, for Master of Wine programs, and so educational arms, great way for people to learn about wine, and there are other ways to learn about wine, and so even though you're, people like to take these classes and that are associated with the master sommelier programs. You don't necessarily have to plan to become a sommelier. So, but it's just a great way to learn about wine, and so there's nothing wrong with that. Now, I say, knock yourself out if you want to get some kind of sommelier, designation or whatever. The more people that learn about wine, and the better, whether it's going to be your profession or not. And so now we have, of course, wine influencers, and usually they're really well educated, and they have all kinds of degrees of this and that, or and they don't work in the wine business. They sit at home in their bathtubs, showing wine brands, and so, which is great. Anything that probably helps you, right? Chateau Tablas, look at this. And
I mean, anything that gets people
anything.
talking about wine to a new audience is, I think, a good thing, because I think that the idea that wine is hard, that wine is complicated,
Yeah.
and
That's why I'm all for these wine influences. I'm all for it, or any kind of and before 7-8 years ago, it was all about bloggers, right? There are fewer bloggers now because I mean, how do you make money doing it? But it's all good. It's a lot better than before. And so where it was really hard for people to find a place or a way, to get educated about wine. And so when I started in the business, it was all self-taught. The first two master sommeliers, Richard and Eddie, in Hawaii, who were my colleagues, they're self-taught.
Right.
If you wanted to learn about chateaus or Einzelage in Germany, they had to go there themselves, and they did their own reading. And there was no such thing as the internet in those days, and you had to open up a book. Imagine that. So, I would say the first dozen master sommeliers were self-taught. So there were no classes for them, and in fact, they had to go all the way to England to take the tests. Yeah. So, so Richard, again, is just another. When I was young, I walked to school,
uphill.
barefoot. So,
Yes.
Richard Dean, he had to take the test 3 times before he passed, and so that means he went back and forth to London 3 times, and before he finally passed. Eddie, the first one, he did it on his first try. So,
Okay. So after writing columns and articles for decades, you published a book.
Yes, I did.
Last year. Do you have a picture to show?
Yes, there it is.
Lovely.
Lodi.
So what made you want to dive into something as comprehensive as a book?
Well, remember we had something called COVID.
Wait. Oh, I think I remember that.
Oh, it's a terrible time, of course. So what happened was, I moved to Lodi in 2010, and so I've been writing about Lodi ever since. And so, and a lot of material, and the stories have to be told. because a lot of these vineyards and vintners and grape growers, their stories haven't been told.
Yeah.
Because when people still think, in Americans at least, or anyone around the world, they say California wine. Oh, Napa Valley. And maybe they might say Robles.
Baby steps.
But they're not going to say Lodi. So the story had to be told. So, so I wrote it. So 550 pages. Right here, it's heavy. You can, lift weight up the bicep.
And it's I mean, I assume that's one of your photographs on the cover also.
This is a photograph of a flame tokay vine planted in 1889 and on its own roots, still alive. And I can get in my car right now from my house and be there, stand next to it in 4 minutes. And
Amazing.
But it's amazing to be able to, to live among these living pieces of history. You're literally brushing against history when you walk through these vineyards. And Lodi has many vineyards, over 50, 75, 80, or 100 years. In this case, over 130 years. And so we have that. And again, that's the reason why I'm here. And there's more of it here. That we have over 9,000 acres, I would estimate, of vineyards that are over 50 years old. Planted the 1960s or early, and a lot of it goes into the ordinary wine that you see in a grocery store. So
Amazing.
And
you think of how rare those are and how valued those are in most other regions. Like what an incredible resource to have as a region, that many acres of old vines.
And what's nice, Jason, is now it's a big deal. Now, and that's only, we've had a lot of push. The Historic Vineyard Society started up in California, thanks to some really visionary vintners here.
Yeah, I've talked to Morgan Twain Peterson on
people
this.
Like Tegan so Carlisle, and so that's great. And just this past Monday, the UK-based Old Vine Registry, and that's oldvineregistry.org, has launched, and that is an accounting of all the old vine vineyards around the world.
Wow.
Yeah, and so there's over 2,000 of them listed in that list, and among which the California old vine plantings, a few hundred of them are just a small amount of them. And so it's become a big deal, and a lot of it is because climate change and a lot of thoughts on farming vineyards. I'm talking about farming on young vineyards. There's changes in pruning styles, thoughts on vine age are really coming into account. Now that people kind of know how to plant a vineyard, it's how do you cultivate it in the same fashion as an old vine, which will last longer. And so you need.
We spend a ton of time thinking about this down here, kind of back to a lot of those older models of wider spacing and
larger trunks, and you want to create spurs, and prune them in such a way where you have more sap flow. And so the vine is inherently healthier. And so instead of changing them out like they have been in Napa Valley every 20 to 30 years, the idea is, okay, how can we make it go 50 or 100? And then so you need, number one, a healthy environment, but number two, you have to, change your approach. And so this is where this very recent history, interest in old vines comes in, and because the old vines are literally, I think, right now teaching the industry, how to farm old vines, how to farm middle-aged vines, how to farm new vines. You have to apply the same thinking, for you. And of course, it's all health, regenerative, organic and biodynamic applications, but that really is the same thing. you're cultivating in a way, where you're creating the environment where your vines will grow a while, and healthier vines presumably produce better fruit, and they'll live longer. And so this whole thing about older vines, it had we're making a big deal about it around the world, of course, because old vines tend to get pulled out, right? So the whole idea is, don't pull these out. Let's keep them in the ground. But the only way we can keep it in the ground is you actually buy wines from these old vines.
Has to be economical.
At some point, a farmer has, to get enough money, for, at least as much as it costs to farm the damn things, and which is a big challenge, and so yeah.
So is there? I mean, Lodi is on, I think, sort of the same track that Paso Robles has been on in trying to kind of emerge from the shadows of, like, it's not and it's not Sonoma. Is there a myth about Lodi that you would particularly like to dispel?
Yeah, the biggest myth is that Lodi is a desert. Because people know that Lodi exists somewhere in the area of Stockton and Sacramento. So in other words, it's in the middle of the Central Valley. But what people don't realize is, well, there's Central Valley and there's Central Valley. There's Redding, there's Bakersfield, there's Modesto and all that. And especially, going towards Los Angeles, it is very dry. But they have water, obviously, because a great state of California is blessed with that. And so you can do farming, but those are hotter climates. Lodi is located just east of the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. And so that is the only break in the coastal mountains in the entire coast, going from Canada all the way to Mexico. It's the only break. It's where the Delta, you probably know, is below sea level. Yeah, and there is no other place in California like that. And so we're immediately influenced by maritime air from the bay. And so even though it is, east of the bay in the Central Valley, it's a moderate climate region. The closest regions to us in terms of climatic, this Mediterranean type climate, is the Mid-Napa Valley and probably the east-north sides of Sonoma County. They share the closest temperature sort of readings as we do here. They're different because they're foggier, they're closer to the coast, and we have more sun here because we're a little away from the coast, so we don't have fog during the summer. But we have the same moderate climate. And so anyone who's been to Sacramento or Lodi knows that these places have a lot of water and lots of big tall trees, and it's very green. So it's not a desert, folks. It's not, Lodi is not a desert. Hello.
Okay. Well, one more Lodi question.
Yeah.
In the subtitle of your book, you call Lodi America's largest wine growing region. What do you mean largest?
Well, it's not large in terms of pure acreage. There are larger appellations out east. But in terms of acres. And so you have about 46,000 acres in Paso Robles, and almost as much as Napa, about 48, 49. Sonoma County is about 55,000. Lodi are over 100,000 acres of wine grapes. So people have to remember. So in the old days, when I came up in the 70s and 80s, more than 50% of the grapes went to large producers like Gallo and or Louis Martini or Charles Krug, big producers that produce $7, $8, $9 wines. You can't do $7, $8, $9 wines for Napa and Sonoma anymore. And so in the 80s and 90s, the large producers came out to Lodi. And so Lodi grew from maybe about 60,000 acres in the 1980s to over 100,000. So in terms of acres, the ball game is out here. And so when you go to a grocery store or drugstore or whatever, most of the wines you see that have a California label were probably grown in Lodi. a Woodbridge. See, a Woodbridge sign says California Cab or Chard. 85-90% of those grapes come from Lodi. And so, whereas if it was done, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, it would have come from Napa or Sonoma. Right. So that, but that's not monetarily, financially possible anymore. So that's what I mean by Lodi. And the reason why Lodi has so many wine grapes out here is because it's a very good climate, and it has soils.
And that's also why the vines can actually live that long. They
right.
have to be in a place where they're happy growing.
Right, and Paso has a great climate and amazing soils, but you're on these hillsides, and so it's hard to do it economically. Right. In Paso, and you don't have the water we do because we're right in between the Sierras and the Delta. We have approximately 50 times more water than you do there, and so there you go. That's why there are so many grapes here. So,
I've one. We're getting, actually, we're over the time that I normally try to keep these to, but I have one more thing I want to ask you before then getting you to share how people can learn more. I want to talk to you about your photography, because I know your website is randycaparosophotographer.com.
Yeah.
Your photographs are stunning. I love seeing all of those old vines. Is photography something that you have always enjoyed doing, or is that something you've come to more recently alongside your writing career?
Yeah, it did start when we started doing the Sommelier Journal back in 2008, and we couldn't afford photographers. So if I did a story on Mendocino or Sonoma Coast or whatever, I'd have to take my own photographs, and so that's when it started, and you start with the cheap cameras that you can afford, and now I have like lots of expensive camera equipment, and so and of course now I work with the Lodi people, and so you want to chronicle it not only with words but with images, and the only thing I haven't mastered is the art of videos and things like that. Those are for the wine influencers. Sometimes I look at them and I'm aghast at how well they do it, and I have no talent for that. So I can't do the visuals or anything like that. And besides, would you rather look at me or an influencer? No.
We're clearly choosing to look at you today, so I'll let that answer speak for itself.
So photography is something that I grew into, and so I do my best. Yeah.
That's great. Your best. Very impressive.
If you're going to write about wine these days, you have to do it, because you can't, photographers, God bless them, they have to get paid too, so they're very expensive. So these men can't afford them.
Okay, awesome. Well, Randy, it's been such a pleasure to dive into your story a little bit. Thank you for spending a chunk of your Wednesday afternoon sharing it. If people want to learn more about your work, follow you, how should they do that? What's the best way?
Well, Instagram, I'm Randy Caparoso, wine author, and but if you Google me, you find about 50 pages. So, or do Lodi, exclamation point book, you'll find my book, and so I'm an older person too, so you'll find me on Facebook. So, and I'd love to, stay in contact with anyone, and if they want to come out to Lodi, great. Yeah, I'm easy. I'm the easiest person in the world to find, because you have to be, right. Just like you, Jason. Just put your name in.
Yeah, not hard to find this
in the Google, and you'll find.
Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you everybody who joined, and hope you have a good growing season, a good summer up in Lodi.
Yeah, we're ready for our hot weather
down here. Looks like it might be starting. And meanwhile, I hope to see you sooner than later, here, there, or someplace in between.
Absolutely, Jason. Hopefully, it's very soon. And I enjoyed your talk, and thank you for you know, your interest in my little world.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Okay, thanks,
You
Randy.
take care.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Yeah, bye.